Ms. Leila, good evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Did this outcome surprise you?
Unfortunately not. I think we've been tracking this for a few years and constantly looking at this. It isn't surprising. Doesn't mean it's not disheartening.
How does this one compare to previous ones? Has the situation gotten worse or better?
So the situation's not getting better. Obviously, we had some movements. We track the JSE top 100. So we did have some movements in the JSE top 40, meaning at the time that we completed our analysis, there actually were no female CEOs in the JSE top 40, which was discouraging. We've seen a little bit of movement there. But overall, as you stated, in the JSE top 100, only 3.3% of CEOs were female. The picture doesn't get much better when you're looking at CFOs or executive directors. So CFOs were looking at 12.7% and executive directors about 8%.
Have you been able to sort of speak to, let's say, top 40 or even the top 100 that you're doing, to sort of get a sense as to why? Because everyone seems to be saying the right things. Everyone is aware, and as the report says, people concur that there is a need to correct these wrongs. But nothing is happening practically where it matters. Have you been able to get a sense from the boards, the executives, why, as to why this is not happening?
It's hard to say why it's not happening, but I agree with you. There's a lack of action, or nobody really knows what action needs to be taken. So there's some research that's been done in this area, and the research seems to suggest that a few key areas need to be looked at. So the one thing, and obviously this is where our report comes in, is the remuneration. You really need to do the analysis and find out how big is the problem. So that's not only looking at gender representation, but taking that further and saying where you do have representation, what is the pay gap? So what are you paying women and men? And we did that analysis in the different sectors, and in no sector are women paid more than men, and that's the shocking truth. You know, some sectors are worse than others. Healthcare was the worst, with a 28.1% pay gap between women and men. But to continue answering your question, what can be done? Things like succession planning and recruitment really need to now come into the picture. And there has been maybe not such an active approach taken when looking at recruitment, when looking at succession planning. Are you identifying females in those processes? And are you ensuring that you have sufficient females where you're recruiting? Are you making sure there's enough female candidates there? Now, yes, you can argue that there's a lack of candidates, but are you really going out and finding them? So at least when you're presenting the candidates, you are presenting enough females. And other what seems like symbolic things, but some artificial means, such as making sure that, leadership, and where there is male leadership, which is the case in our JSE Top 100, where are they appearing, where are they speaking, what are they doing, and are they ensuring that, for example, if they're in a panel interview, they don't find themselves in a panel interview where there's only men, that they actually make sure that what they are doing is actually speaking.
Well, they won't if the companies didn't make an effort to have those women in meaningful positions in the first place. So the panel is going to reflect, the reality of the situation. The question, I guess, is what needs to be done and how? I remember, like in previous years, there has been talk of naming and shaming. There has been talk of even legislating and saying, look, this is what you need to do. If you don't, then there should be consequences for you. And the reporting mechanisms, there should also be that reflection of like your gender parity. But these have only been suggestions, which haven't really seen the light of day.
So I always like to quote the UK as an example because, as we all know, the gender pay gap is reportable there. And it's been that way for a year or so now. And in the most recent results, we saw that almost as many companies reported the gap increasing as companies reporting the gap decreasing. So does increased disclosure actually help? Probably not. Is it making the conversation happen? Is it increasing awareness? Yes. So, it's a double-edged sword. What can be done? We need to talk about it more. We need to take those symbolic actions. The JSE is obviously bringing in more regulation in terms of policy, not in terms of only gender, but diversity on a wider spectrum. So things are being done and action is being taken. But definitely there needs to be pushback. So those symbolic gestures need to happen. There needs to be big action, and people need to acknowledge that it is a problem and not find excuses as to why it can't be fixed.
Okay, look at the JSE itself. You had a woman heading the JSE. The one who's going to succeed her is also a woman. One would imagine that if they find themselves in a sea of men, their voice gets drowned. And some of the consequences of that is that you may, like other women, may see them as people who close the door behind them.
So I would hope it's not the case that they would find that...
No, I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that that's the other danger,
yes.
in that the few women who actually make it, even though they may be trying from their vantage points,
yes.
Finding themselves, surrounded by men may mean that their voices get shouted out. And at the end of the day, you may just find other women thinking, but look at those women who are supposed to, which then brings us to the issue of it's not their responsibility, it's not other women's responsibility to take up this cause, but everybody's.
Absolutely, and it is a difficult position to be in, as a woman in those positions, because you think of like a Sheryl Sandberg. She's become a warrior for women's rights. And these people also have jobs to do, and it's not just that a CEO who is female should spend all of her time, championing women's rights or paving the way for other women.
Yeah, because if they do that and they fail, people will be like, we put a woman there, but look what she did.
Absolutely, and that's definitely not what we want to see happen. So it's a disproportionate burden which sits upon their shoulders. I really think the solution or the answer lies in that succession planning, lies in the recruitment, and in really analyzing how big is the problem and putting in firm action points and disclosing these are the action points that we're committing to and actually trying to achieve them and reporting your achievement against them.
But if you look at a lot of things that have happened in this country, with many of them with greater or lesser degrees of success. But I'm going to take a random example like local content when it comes to music. I remember when those conversations started, people said that will never happen. Imagine DJ so-and-so playing Brenda Fassie. It's just not going to happen. There won't be, crowds, there'll be no advertising and so on. But until people were forced, they were given quotas.
Yeah.
Local content actually, became better. The musicians got better. You got producers who were good at it. They were given more airtime. Advertising came. You found local, stations that actually said we're playing more local than we're playing overseas music. The rest, as they say, is history.
Absolutely, and that's a great success story. And I would hope that something similar will play out here. Much debate is had about quotas and whether that's the right way to go, and many say no, and obviously that can lead to results that are not necessarily what is desired. But I do believe in some sort of artificial step-in. So there needs to be some sort of forced action in order for there to be action. Otherwise, if you just let it take its toll, the reports say it's going to take hundreds of years to close the pay gap and the gender gap globally. We can't afford for that to happen. There's too much for us to gain. PwC has also released a report indicating, in conjunction with Stats South Africa, that closing the wage gap by as little as 10% between men and women could lead to 3.2% GDP growth. Isn't that what we're all looking for? And significant reduction in unemployment rates. So we can't afford to let that slip us by.
Well, thanks very much for coming through. That's what we're going to
having me
for this evening.